In the bustling heart of New York City, Ethan Blake is known as one of the city's top defense attorneys. Charismatic and sharp-witted, he has built his career on defending impossible cases, always with a touch of theatrical flair. His reputation, however, is put to the test when he receives an urgent phone call from an old college friend, now a public defender. "We have a complicated case, Ethan. A young man named Lucas Haynes has been accused of a terrible crime. A double homicide in Central Park. But something's wrong. Very wrong." The colleague's voice is grave and urgent. Intrigued and perhaps a bit bored with his recent cases, Ethan accepts the challenge. Lucas Haynes, a 21-year-old with a clean record, was found near the crime scene, covered in blood and in shock. The evidence seems indisputable. The murder weapon was found in his possession, and his fingerprints were everywhere. However, Lucas insists he doesn't remember anything from that night, as if lost in a fog. When Ethan visits Lucas in prison, he meets a haunted and confused young man. "I don't know what happened," Lucas repeats, eyes wide and voice trembling. "I just remember walking through the park, and then, everything's a blur." With his experience, Ethan knows something doesn't add up. He begins to delve deeper into the case and quickly uncovers a series of inconsistencies. The murder weapon, an unusual knife, had disappeared from a local museum weeks earlier. Lucas's fingerprints, though present at the scene, don't match those found in other parts of the park. There is something more sinister at play, something that defies logic and reason. As Ethan digs deeper, he starts to realize that the case is not just about Lucas. There's a web of corruption stretching through the corridors of New York's power, involving politicians, business moguls, and even judicial figures. Documents mysteriously disappear, key witnesses change their statements or vanish, and Ethan himself begins to receive veiled threats. One night, after a long day at work, Ethan finds an enigmatic message in his mailbox: "Be careful what you seek in the shadows, for the shadows may look back." This message makes it clear that he is meddling with forces that prefer to remain hidden. Ethan is a man of principles but also pragmatic. He knows he's treading dangerous territory. His career and life are at stake, but he cannot retreat. He is determined to uncover the truth, not just to save Lucas but also to expose the rot infesting the city's foundations. As Ethan prepares for the trial, he begins to feel the weight of the conspiracy surrounding him. But he is not alone. His assistant, Claire, a young lawyer with a natural talent for unraveling mysteries, and his friend and private investigator, Mike, join forces with him. Together, they begin to uncover what appears to be a web of intrigue that surpasses anything Ethan has ever faced. With the trial approaching, the pressures mount. Ethan is confronted with difficult choices and moral dilemmas. He must decide how far he is willing to go to expose the truth, knowing that every step he takes could put him in mortal danger. The first part of the labyrinth is set, and the pieces of the game begin to move. But who is really in control? And how deep do the shadows surrounding this case go? The courtroom was packed. The presence of the media, curious onlookers, and victims' families created an atmosphere thick with tension. All eyes were on the young defendant, Lucas Haynes, and his lawyer, Ethan Blake. Ethan knew that every move would be scrutinized, every word could decide his client's fate. The prosecutor, Martin Hale, a veteran known for building solid, nearly unassailable cases, began the trial with a clear and compelling narrative, describing Lucas as a troubled young man who, in a moment of uncontrollable rage, committed a heinous act. The evidence, Hale said, was irrefutable: the weapon, the fingerprints, the blood. Everything pointed to Lucas as the killer. However, Ethan was undeterred. He knew he needed to deconstruct the prosecutor's perfect narrative, and his strategy began with the witnesses. First, he called the museum guard from where the knife was stolen. Under a series of carefully crafted questions, the guard revealed inconsistencies in his earlier account. He couldn't clearly remember the night of the theft, and the security camera footage had been mysteriously erased. Next, Ethan focused on the forensic evidence. The defense's forensic expert, a crime scene analysis specialist, pointed out that Lucas's fingerprints found at the scene were inconclusive. The bloodstains, instead of being a sign of guilt, could have been planted, a hypothesis Ethan suggested to the jury with calculated calm. But Ethan's defense was not just technical. He knew he needed to humanize Lucas in the eyes of the jury. To do so, he brought Lucas's mother to the witness stand, a humble woman who tearfully spoke about the loving and responsible son she had always known. She described how Lucas had struggled through life's adversities, working hard to stay in school and help at home. The testimony was moving, and some jury members seemed touched. The high point of the trial came when Ethan decided to call his own client to the witness stand. Lucas, visibly nervous, gave his version of events. He described how he had been walking through the park that night, feeling overwhelmed by personal problems, and how suddenly everything became a blur. His voice trembled as he stated that he did not remember seeing the victims or committing any crime. The most impactful part of his testimony came when Lucas revealed that he had been receiving threatening messages weeks before the crime. He had ignored them, thinking it was just a bad joke. However, these messages now seemed to take on a sinister meaning. Ethan used this detail to suggest that Lucas could have been targeted in a conspiracy. As the trial progressed, Ethan and his team faced increasing obstacles. Crucial documents disappeared from the defense's office, and a key witness was found dead under suspicious circumstances. The feeling of being constantly watched intensified, especially after Claire, Ethan's assistant, noticed a suspicious car following her for several days. Ethan began to realize that he was dealing with something much bigger than a simple criminal case. The threats against him became more explicit. One night, after a particularly tense hearing, he found his home ransacked, with a single note left on his desk: "Stop now, or you will face the consequences." Despite the escalating threats, Ethan stood firm. He was convinced that Lucas was innocent and that the truth needed to be revealed. But the truth, he knew, came at a price. The trial had turned into a deadly game of chess, with each of Ethan's moves countered by invisible forces. The noose was tightening, but Ethan was determined to press on. With the support of Claire and Mike, he began to trace a line connecting the powerful figures involved in the case, including politicians, businessmen, and even members of the police force. Each revelation brought him closer to the epicenter of the corruption infesting the city. The trial was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. Ethan knew the battle would be long and dangerous, but he was prepared to go the distance, not just to save Lucas but to expose the truth, no matter how dark it might be. As the trial dragged on, Ethan and his team uncovered more shocking information about the corruption network. Mike, the private investigator, followed a crucial lead: a series of suspicious financial transactions linked to an organization called the Arcanum Foundation, which seemed to be at the center of all the dark dealings. The Arcanum Foundation was an ostensibly philanthropic organization involved in charity projects and social events. However, behind this facade, it operated as a money laundering scheme and influence peddling operation, manipulating political and judicial decisions. Mike's investigations revealed that many of the foundation's funds came from public contracts and donations from companies with specific interests in municipal decisions. Ethan knew that exposing the connection between the Arcanum Foundation and Lucas's case would be crucial for the defense. But this wouldn't be easy. The evidence was hard to come by, and those who could testify against the Foundation were either scared or had disappeared. The invisible threat over Ethan and his team became increasingly palpable. Meanwhile, Claire discovered a link between the Arcanum Foundation and one of the jurors. This juror, apparently an ordinary citizen, had close ties to one of the companies involved with the Foundation, raising serious questions about the trial's impartiality. In a risky move, Ethan filed a motion to investigate the juror, alleging possible corruption. This action not only put more pressure on the case but also drew even more media and public attention. The situation was further complicated by the testimony of an unexpected witness, Jessica Lane, a former employee of the Arcanum Foundation who had decided to speak out. She reported seeing documents showing payments made to influential city figures, including members of the police and government, to protect the Foundation's interests. Jessica also revealed that the Foundation was involved in various illegal activities, including embezzlement and public tender manipulation. Jessica's testimony was a significant blow to the prosecution and the Foundation, but it also put her life at risk. After her court appearance, Jessica was placed in witness protection, but the sense of danger lingered. Ethan knew they needed more evidence to solidify the case and protect those willing to tell the truth. As Ethan and his team's investigations continued, they discovered that the Arcanum Foundation was directly linked to the disappearance of evidence and the death of the key witness. The connections between high-ranking city officials and the Foundation became increasingly apparent, painting a picture of systemic corruption reaching the highest echelons of power. In court, the tension reached a boiling point. Prosecutor Hale, under pressure from the new evidence and growing suspicion of corruption, began to lose control of the case. He tried to discredit Jessica Lane, insinuating that she was lying to protect herself from fraud charges, but the damage was already done. The narrative of the case was shifting, and the jury began to see Lucas not as a murderer, but as a victim of a much larger conspiracy. Despite the courtroom victories, Ethan and his team faced new challenges outside of it. The threats against them intensified, with Ethan receiving an explicit message: "Stop now, or there will be consequences for those you love." Ethan knew he was at a critical point. He had to decide whether to continue fighting, risking everything, or to retreat to protect himself and his team. But Ethan was a man of principles. He knew he couldn't stop now. The truth was within reach, and he was determined to expose all the corruption infesting the city. However, he also knew that every step forward brought him closer to danger. With the trial entering its final phase, Ethan was ready for the endgame. He planned to call a surprise witness, someone who could turn the tide once and for all. But before he revealed this witness, he needed to ensure the safety of his team and all the witnesses involved. The tension was at its peak, and everyone knew that what was to come could change the city forever. The courtroom atmosphere was electric. The room was filled with journalists, onlookers, and public figures, all eager to see the outcome of a case that had become a public spectacle. The case of Lucas Haynes had transformed from a criminal trial into a corruption scandal shaking New York's foundations. Ethan Blake, with a quiet confidence, prepared to make his final move. For weeks, he and his team had worked tirelessly to connect all the pieces of the puzzle, and now, they had a witness who could seal the fate of the Arcanum Foundation and expose the web of corruption. The tension was palpable, both for the defense and the prosecution. The surprise witness was none other than a former board member of the Arcanum Foundation, Jonathan Cole, who had recently left the organization under mysterious circumstances. Cole, a middle-aged man with a past of shady business dealings, was clearly nervous as he took the witness stand. His decision to testify came with considerable risks, but he was willing to tell the truth. Cole revealed startling details about the Arcanum Foundation's internal operations. He described how the foundation used its connections to influence judicial and political decisions, buying favors and silencing dissenters. Even more shocking, he claimed that the foundation was directly involved in blackmail and bribery operations, using compromising information to control politicians and businessmen. The courtroom was silent as Cole spoke. Ethan, maintaining his characteristic composure, calmly asked Cole about the threats he had received. Cole admitted that he had been threatened multiple times to keep silent and that he feared for his life and that of his family. His statements were damning, and the jury's reaction was visible. However, the most impactful moment of Cole's testimony came when he mentioned a list of names. This list, he said, contained the names of several influential figures, including Prosecutor Hale, who were allegedly in cahoots with the Arcanum Foundation. The revelation shocked the courtroom, casting a shadow of doubt over the integrity of the prosecutor and the judicial system itself. Prosecutor Hale attempted to discredit Cole, claiming he was lying to get back at the foundation after being ousted from the board. However, Ethan had an ace up his sleeve, a series of emails and internal documents from the foundation, provided by an anonymous whistleblower, corroborating Cole's statements. These documents clearly showed the foundation's illicit operations and its connections with high-ranking city officials. The case had reached a turning point. The evidence presented by Ethan not only questioned Lucas Haynes's guilt but also exposed a vast and complex conspiracy. The judge, visibly disturbed by the revelations, announced that the court would need time to consider the new evidence and the ethical and legal implications of continuing with Hale as the prosecutor. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the situation was becoming even more dangerous. Claire and Mike reported being followed, and Ethan received an anonymous message threatening to reveal secrets from his past if he didn't back down. The pressure on everyone involved was intense, and security became an immediate concern. Determined to protect everyone fighting alongside him, Ethan hired private security for his team and the witnesses. He knew he was facing powerful enemies but was willing to go all the way. The truth needed to be revealed, regardless of the personal cost. The court was preparing for the final phase of the trial. The city was abuzz, with protests and heated debates about the integrity of the legal system. Ethan Blake had become a sort of folk hero, a symbol of resistance against corruption. But he knew that the real challenge was yet to come. With all eyes on the courtroom, Ethan was ready for his final statement. He planned to expose the full extent of the corruption and manipulation, not just to save Lucas but to initiate a reform that could change the city forever. The fate of many rested in his hands, and the world awaited the outcome. The courtroom was silent, the tension almost tangible. It was the moment of truth. Ethan Blake, feeling the weight of weeks of legal battle and the anxious gazes of everyone in the room, took a deep breath and stood up for his final statement. He knew this would be the decisive moment, not only for Lucas Haynes's future but also to expose the truth and confront the dark forces that had tried to silence him. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ethan began, his voice firm and clear, "this case is not just about the life of a young man accused of a crime he did not commit. It's about something much larger, something that strikes at the heart of our society and the justice system we all must trust." Ethan carefully reviewed the evidence presented, from the inconsistencies in the physical evidence to the testimonies of Jonathan Cole and Jessica Lane. He highlighted how the Arcanum Foundation had used its influence to corrupt the judicial system, buying favors and manipulating trials. Ethan also pointed out the threats and intimidation he and his team had faced, trying to prevent the truth from coming out. He then revealed one last piece of evidence he had kept in reserve until that moment. It was a video, delivered anonymously to him, showing a secret meeting of Arcanum Foundation members, including high-ranking city figures, discussing how to cover up their operations and influence Lucas Haynes's trial. The video was undeniable and caused an uproar in the courtroom. Prosecutor Hale, who had become increasingly uncomfortable throughout the trial, tried to argue that the video could be a forgery, but his credibility was already in tatters. The judge, after a brief conference with the lawyers, decided that the evidence against the Arcanum Foundation and the allegations of corruption needed to be thoroughly investigated, temporarily suspending Lucas's trial. The final verdict was a game-changer. With the new evidence presented and the corruption exposed, Lucas was acquitted of the murder charges. The judge's decision also included an order for a full investigation into the Arcanum Foundation and its associates, including Prosecutor Hale. As the courtroom erupted in reactions of relief and surprise, Ethan felt a mix of victory and exhaustion. He had faced one of the greatest challenges of his career and emerged victorious, but he knew the battle was far from over. The revelations from the trial had opened a Pandora's box that would shake New York for months, perhaps years. In the days that followed, the investigations into the Arcanum Foundation led to multiple arrests and a complete review of several judicial decisions. Ethan, Claire, and Mike were hailed as heroes, but they knew their victory came at a cost. The city, though grateful, was also in shock, questioning how deeply corruption had infiltrated the institutions they trusted. Lucas, now free, expressed his gratitude to Ethan and his team but was clearly marked by the experience. Ethan advised him to seek help to deal with the trauma and to start a new life. As for Ethan, he reflected on the impact the case had had on his own life and career. He had risked everything for a client and for a cause greater than any legal case. With the truth revealed and justice, in some way, restored, Ethan knew he had fulfilled his duty. But he also knew that the fight against corruption and for the truth is an ongoing effort. The shadow he had faced in that case could reappear in new forms, and he would need to remain ever vigilant. As New York began to recover from the scandal, Ethan, Claire, and Mike prepared for their next challenge, ready to face whatever came next. The city might be changing, but the fight for justice never really ends. And so, Ethan Blake, the lawyer who had faced the shadows, remained a beacon of hope and determination in a world often marked by darkness.